Late 19th century warfare had plenty of weapons, but one machine earned a reputation for absolute lethality. It started with a grim paradox. During the American Civil War, an inventor named Richard Jordan Gatling was disgusted by the slaughter. He created a weapon to replace 100 men. His goal? Smaller armies, fewer deaths. It was a noble failure. His gun used multiple barrels, spun by a hand crank. It was fast, but it wasn't automatic. The man was still the engine. How do you make a gun shoot forever? How do you build a weapon that never gets tired? You take the job from a man and give it to the laws of physics. In 1884, Maxim found the answer. He didn't use a crank. He used the gun's own kick. The principle was brutally simple. A single trigger pull fired one round. The gun kicked back with violent energy. Maxim's design captured that force. The backward motion ejected the hot, spent casing with a metallic clang. Then, it pulled a fresh round from the belt and chambered it. This wasn't a team of 4 men like Gatling's gun required. This was one man, holding a trigger. But endless fire creates endless heat. So Maxim added a water jacket, a simple metal sleeve around the barrel. A soldier pours in water. The gun fires. The barrel heats up. The water boils. Steam pours from the weapon. As long as there was water, the gun could fire. Maxim used the energy of each shot to eject the spent casing and load the next. That non-stop cycle of fire had a price. By the First Battle of Ypres, it turned the gunner into the most hated man on the battlefield, and the most hunted. The front lines of World War I froze, a stalemate. Generals defaulted to old tactics, methods from the Franco-Prussian War. The order was over the top, a human wave of thousands sent to storm enemy lines. But the general's math was obsolete. During the Franco-Prussian War, an infantryman could cross an open field in 40 seconds. In those same 40 seconds, a single Maxim gun fired 400 rounds. No blind spots. A mechanical wall of lead. Entire assaults stopped by 2 men and a machine. This tactical dead end, born on the Western Front, was seen again and again, all the way to the Eastern Front of World War II. An entire generation of military strategy was rendered obsolete by the rate of fire from a single weapon. Generals learned fast. Infantry couldn't break that wall of lead. So by the Battle of the Somme, a dedicated hunt for the machine gun operators had begun. Snipers were the first solution. Men like the Canadian marksman Francis Pegamagabo. They were trained for one job: pick off the gunners. The Maxim's design made it easy. The operator had to sit directly behind the weapon, slightly exposed. A skilled sniper could put a round through his head before the crew even heard the shot. But artillery was the real killer. The deafening crack of a high-explosive shell landing just a few meters away. The blast could wipe out the entire crew instantly. A near miss sent shrapnel ripping through the emplacement. There was no cover, no escape. Why couldn't the crew just fall back? The weapon was a fortress, but it was also a prison. A standard Maxim weighed around 27 kilograms, dry, without a single bullet. Retreating with it under artillery fire was impossible. It demanded a fixed position and constant visual control. When the gunner fell, the second man took over. He would push the dead crewmate's body aside, grab the blood-slick handles, and keep firing, knowing the sniper was still watching. Some positions went through 3 or 4 gunners in a single engagement. The next man in line silently took his place behind the gun, over the body of his comrade. At night, the machine gun betrayed its crew. The water-cooled barrel hissed. A huge cloud of white steam rose into the darkness, a perfect beacon for enemy raiders. While a sniper's bullet offered a quick death, this was something else entirely. Slower, more personal. Small assault groups, just 6 or 8 men, crawled across the mud with knives and grenades. They followed the steam. They threw their grenades. Then they jumped in to finish the job with clubs and trench knives, sometimes with flamethrowers. But raids weren't the only answer. The new question was terrifyingly logical. How do you blind a gun crew without destroying the gun? You fill their trench with gas. Primitive rubber masks were clumsy. The lenses fogged instantly. Gunners couldn't see, loaders couldn't breathe, and the entire team's coordination collapsed. The weapon became useless. For some, there were no masks at all. On the Eastern Front, at the Ossowiec fortress, German forces unleashed a wave of chlorine gas. The Russian defenders had no protection. They were forced to breathe it in, coughing up bloody pieces of their own lungs. But the German infantry who advanced behind the gas saw a nightmare. Half-dead men, wrapped in bloody rags, rose from the green fog. They staggered back to their MG-08 machine guns and opened fire. For the survivors of Ossowiec, even this horror would soon be eclipsed by the sheer butchery of the coming Russian Civil War. On the Western Front, the horror wasn't chemical, it was mathematical. The machine gun was the deadliest weapon on the battlefield, but the job of machine gunner was a death sentence. The British crews even had a nickname for their own unit, the Suicide Club. Why was the most lethal job on the front called the Suicide Club? Because a stationary barrel worked like a magnet for artillery. The week before the Battle of the Somme, British guns fired over 1.5 million shells at the German lines. That's 150 explosions every minute, non-stop. A storm of steel aimed specifically at known machine gun nests. For a German crew, this was a psychological meat grinder. They sat in their bunkers, days on end. Dirt rained from the splintered ceiling beams. A dull, continuous roar vibrated through the concrete. Any second could bring a direct hit, a complete collapse. Then, silence. The shelling stopped. That was the signal. They had to sprint from the bunker to the gun, set it up, and open fire before the first wave of infantry could cross no man's land. It was a structural trap. And artillery wasn't the only threat. The French 37mm M1916 cannon terrified gun crews. Soldiers called it the bunker buster. It gave no warning, no whistle like a mortar shell, just an instant direct impact from a distance, wiping out an entire crew in a flash of light and steel. The numbers tell the real story. The British Machine Gun Corps was formed in 1915. By the end of the war, it had suffered over 62,000 casualties. Out of roughly 170,000 men who served, more than a third were killed or wounded. The Red Army Command needed a way out, a way to free their soldiers from the heavy, clumsy Maxim trap. In 1939, they thought they found it. A new gun, the DS-39, designed by Degtyaryov. Lighter, air-cooled, modern. This was supposed to be the future. Then came the Winter War, Finland. The new gun met its first real test, and it failed, completely. The brutal cold made its springs brittle. The feeding mechanism was so rough it tore ammunition apart. It was a disaster. What does a high command do when its shiny new weapon shatters on first contact? It crawls back to what it knows. Only about 10,000 DS-39s were ever made. The production run was a failure. It meant millions of Soviet soldiers would face the deadliest war in history with a weapon designed in the 19th century. The consequences of this decision arrived in June 1941. Operation Barbarossa. German armor smashed through Soviet lines. The Red Army was in a full-blown retreat, and the heavy Maxims had to be dragged with them, or abandoned. Factory orders were redrafted. Production lines for the DS-39 were shut down, and the plants were retooled to once again produce the Maxim Model 1910. This wasn't just a technical downgrade, it was a known death sentence, and many Soviet soldiers knew exactly why. They remembered the meat grinder of the Russian Civil War, a conflict that officially ended in 1922. Imagine a farmer, pulled from his village, handed a rifle. 1 week later, he's not an infantryman, he's a machine gunner. His hands are burned, blistered from handling the boiling water jacket of the Maxim. His uniform is stained with grease and oil. These weren't just side effects of the job, they were a brand, a black mark. In this war, there were no rules. The Communist Red Army fought the White Army. Dozens of smaller factions fought everyone else. And when a Maxim gun crew was captured, they weren't taken as prisoners, they were targets for revenge. A patrol overruns a position. The gunners drop their weapons, try to blend in, but it never worked. An enemy soldier orders them to show their hands. He sees the telltale blisters, the scorch marks. They were executed on the spot. This wasn't an isolated practice. Both sides did it. It was personal. The hatred for the men behind the gun became a tactic of its own. Some factions, like Nestor Makhno's anarchist army, even mounted their Maxims on horse-drawn carts. By 1919, they had 1,000 of them racing across Ukraine, exposed, charging straight at the enemy. By the time the war finally burned out, between 7 and 12 million people were dead. By the Battle of Stalingrad, the rules of that old nightmare had been cemented into law. Soviet defenders set up their Maxims in the ruins, blasted factories, grain silos. Stalin had issued Order Number 227. The words were simple: not one step back. For a machine gunner, this was a death sentence. How do you retreat when your gun weighs over 60 kilograms? You don't. You either die with it, or you face a tribunal for losing it. That 60-kilogram weight was the Maxim, its shield, and its Sokolov-wheeled mount, a dead anchor in the rubble. Imagine the metallic screech of the steel wheels, jammed in brick and concrete. To retreat was impossible. To stay was suicide. You were trapped between the enemy in front of you and your own army behind you. A gun crew's only choice was to try and drag the weapon back through collapsed floors, while their own commissars watched for any sign of abandonment. In the frozen hell of the Winter War, a mechanical paradox, a new problem, with a strange, primitive solution. Why did the obsolete Maxim survive in snowdrifts where the brand new MG42 jammed solid? The answer was simple: water and snow. The Finns were the first to figure it out. Their modified Maxim, the M32/33, had a problem. It would overheat. But in the bitter Finnish cold, the solution was everywhere. A gunner unscrews a wide cap on the water jacket. He reaches over the trench parapet, grabs a handful of dirty snow, and shoves it straight into the boiling water. A sharp hiss, a plume of thick steam. The gun is ready. The Soviets saw this. They copied it. By 1941, their own M1910s had the same wide mouth opening, a tractor cap. Snow became an infinite free coolant, a battlefield consumable. On paper, the German MG42 was a monster. It fired at 1,200 rounds per minute, double the Maxim 600. But on the Eastern Front, that speed became a weakness. At -40 degrees Celsius, the MG's air-cooled barrel would heat up, then flash cool. The metal would warp, the gun would jam. The Maxim's ancient water jacket acted like a thermostat, stabilizing the barrel's temperature. It wasn't genius technology. It was just a massive, heavy buffer against physics. A gun from the 1880s, sometimes preferred over the pinnacle of modern engineering, because it was too primitive to fail in the cold. But this trick solved only one problem. The gun was still an anchor, a 60-kilogram liability. By 1942, the Soviet High Command finally issued the official order to find a replacement. Shoving snow into the barrel jacket was a crude fix, not a solution. The weapon was too heavy, too slow. By 1942, it was an anchor in a war defined by speed. Soviet soldiers stormed Berlin with a gun from their grandfather's era, a 60-kilogram relic. From the inferno of Kursk to the final push into the Reichstag, they dragged the obsolete machine gun through the mud. The official order for a replacement came in 1942. A year later, the Army had its answer. May 1943, the SG-43 Goryunov. Its designer, Pyotr Goryunov, was a former soldier. He knew the Maxim's every failure from personal experience. His new weapon was air-cooled, lighter, built for the modern battlefield. But the solution created a production paradox. The Tula and Izhevsk arms factories were running at maximum capacity, churning out Maxims. To stop the lines and retool for the SG-43 meant weeks of zero output, a supply gap the front could not afford. So the state made a choice: keep building the flawed, heavy, outdated weapon. The last Maxim rolled off the assembly line in 1945. The factories finally went silent. But the war's end created a new problem. What do you do with mountains of obsolete iron? You give it away. Moscow handed thousands of its stockpiled Maxims to communist allies. First to North Korea, then to North Vietnam. The guns kept spreading, appearing in conflicts across Africa and the Middle East. Decades passed. In the late 1990s, the Finnish army finally cleared its last Maxim models from reserve storage. The story seemed over. It wasn't. Fast forward to 2026. A soldier straps a modern plastic optic onto the heavy, worn-down steel of a Tsarist-era water jacket. A design made to cut down cavalry charges is put back to work. The core mechanics are over 140 years old. The weapon is still seeing action in active conflicts.